Okay, we're going to use an example here that is slightly different than everything else we've done with these radicals. And the different part is we have addition and subtraction happening. And addition and subtraction are very picky. Okay, there's specific ways things can go together and specific ways they can't. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of ways to simplify this entire fraction. It's got 3 different terms in it. It looks kind of complicated. I'm going to give you a couple of different strategies. One is not better than the other. You just kind of take your pick. Whatever seems to fit best in your mind and make you most comfortable, use that method and get better and better at it. So what we're going to do is first we're going to start with this piece right here. When you see a radical, the first thing you should think is, can I write this in a simpler fashion? Okay, can I somehow make that number in the radical smaller? So part of your skill set needs to be just being able to break this down, kind of as a habit without thinking about it. So we want to think, is there a perfect square that goes into 20? And the answer is yes. 4 is a perfect square. 5 is not, but we only need one of them. And the square root of 4 happens to be 2, and the square root of 5 is, that's something I don't know, so I'm not going to worry about it. So from here on out in the problem, I am going to replace the square root of 20 with 2 times the square root of 5. I'm just going to write it in a simpler way. You have to get used to seeing that. So I'm going to write this, 8 plus or minus 2 square root 5 over 4. Now, remember that plus or minus there, that actually is addition and subtraction. It means I have 2 different numbers represented here, and it's kind of the lazy mathematician's way of writing 2 different answers both at the same time without having to rewrite them, okay, because they're very close to each other. So it's 8 plus this decimal divided by 4 and 8 minus that decimal divided by 4. Now, you can first begin, one way to do this is to split this up into 2 fractions and deal with them separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, look, if I've got all this stuff divided by 4, I could really make this 8 fourths plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5 fourths. Okay, it's okay to take the numerator and break it up into 2 pieces with adding and subtracting, and they both have a common denominator. See, they both have 4 as their denominator. Now I can simplify these separately. 8 fourths, we know that represents 4 goes into 8 twice, so that's 2 over 1, plus or minus. And then as I look at this, I'm going, okay, hold on. 2 and 4 will simplify to 1/2, but I can't do anything with a 5 because it's not really a 5. It's a never-ending decimal, and it's kind of disguised. So I'm going to write this as 1 over 2 times the square root of 5. And I guess if you were to write this a little bit better, you might just eliminate that as a fraction and say, oh, it's 2 plus or minus square root 5 over 2. Okay, that is okay. That's simplified. Okay, it's not the only way to write it, but it's one way. Now let me show you a different way, and this is probably a little more common. It just depends on personal preference once again. Let's start with 8 plus or minus 2 square root 5 over 4. Now what you might want to do is reduce this or simplify it all at once, but what you have to remember is you can only simplify whole numbers. And if you treat it this way, you can only simplify it if all 3 whole numbers will reduce together, meaning they all have a common factor, something I could take out of each one or divide each one by. So here I have 2, 4, and 8. Well, those will all divide by 2. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these numbers and divide them by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now this right here is another simplified version, and those 2 things have the same meaning. Notice if I were to take, and I'm not going to write it this way, but if I did, if I took 4 divided by 2, that would give me 2. And 1 square root 5 divided by 2, well, gives me 1 square root 5 divided by 2. It really doesn't matter which way I write it. I can write them as separate fractions like I did in green, or I could just write them as one fraction. And I don't really even need that 1. 1 times anything is still itself, so that doesn't really change stuff So I could just write it like that. And it makes no difference which one you pick. You could write it this way, got the box around, or this way over here, has separate fractions that only one of them happens to have a denominator in this case. Either way, it means the same thing. So it just takes some getting used to. You kind of pick your method and then you run with it and just get better and better at that.